Finally, after years of waiting, I can now say this is the KLH Model 7, and today I'm here to review it. Now, for those of you who don't know, these speakers have been in development now since the early 2020s, which is kind of crazy to me because the whole concept behind the Model 7 is pretty simple, which is to be a bigger and better version of the Model 5. In fact, when you look at this speaker, it's easy to notice all of the similarities. For example, like the Model 5, the Model 7 relies on a three-way design, and like the Model 5, it too is an acoustic suspension design, and that's kind of KLH's thing. And according to KLH, there's a number of advantages to using acoustic suspension speakers. The first is that it's supposed to result in higher quality bass than what you would get with a ported speaker, and the second is that it results in behavior that allows the speaker to work better across a wider variety of rooms. Now, whether or not I think they achieved that goal with the Model 7 is something I'll talk about soon, but first, let's go over what you get with these speakers. So, what you get are a set of metal stands. And when it comes to build quality, these speakers are very well made. In fact, the front baffle is 1 inch thick and the rest of the cabinet is nearly as thick using MDF material. And this results in a speaker that weighs nearly 80 pounds with its stand, and it's a very inert cabinet. Now let's go ahead and talk about the finish options. So it's going to be very familiar to those of you who know KLH. You get the West African mahogany veneer, and you also get a walnut veneer. In fact, KLH sent me both of these speakers so I could show off the different colors, but the one thing we all forgot about is that I suck at filming videos, so this is as good as I can do. But one comment about the West African mahogany. I noticed that this review sample is definitely darker than the finish on my Model 5s, and I noticed in warm light it actually has this kind of gold hue, which gives it this cool, rich color. I'll try to show that off if I can here. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the driver complement. So as I just mentioned, this is a three-way design. Let's go ahead and look at the tweeter. So you get a 1 inch aluminum cone tweeter, which is basically the same as what you get with the Model 5, just with some slight modifications. Beneath that, for the mid-range, we have a 5 inch paper cone woofer, and it's going to be a larger and beefier version of what you get on the Model 5, and it's important to note that it comes in its own internal chamber. And then on the very bottom, we have this 13 inch paper cone woofer that's there to give us all of the bass goodness. And lastly, you get these nice soft grills with each speaker. So that is going to be it for the front of the Model 7. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the back. Okay, so first I apologize if my voice sounds a little bit different. I'm sitting down, which is probably going to change the sound of the audio. So here's what I wanted to show you. Not only do you get a set of 5-way binding posts with the Model 7, but like the Model 5, you get this attenuation switch, and this is going to be very important because it allows you to adjust the treble to your taste. For example, if you like a lot of treble, leave it too high. KLH technically calls this neutral, but I think in the real world it doesn't sound very neutral. I think the treble's tilted up there, but that's for you to discover. If you're like me and you like more balanced treble, I would leave it to mid, and then if you're very sensitive to high frequency information, just switch it to low. I'm going to leave it back to mid because that's where I like it. So that is going to be it for the back. Now it's time to mention the big thing, which is, well, it's a much bigger speaker than the Model 5 and it comes with a bigger price tag. The Model 7s retail for $6,000 a pair, which means it is now time to talk about whether or not you get what you're paying for with the Model 7 and whether or not it's worth it. So let's go ahead and talk about that now. Okay, so here's the plan. First, I'm going to give you all an overview as to what the Model 7 sound like. Then I'm going to quickly identify who I think the speaker's for and not for. And then I'm going to dive into more details. That way, by the end of this video, you should know whether or not the Model 7 is the right fit for you. But first, let's talk about the overall sound of the Model 7. So what you're getting is a speaker that's basically like the KLH Model 5, only it is bigger and better. And what I mean by that is you're getting a speaker that checks off most of the audiophile things pretty well, but it delivers the sound to you in a way that allows you to just turn off the critical side of your brain so you can just get back to the ritual of enjoying music and having fun while listening to your music. But still, when it comes to performance, you're getting a big speaker that's actually surprisingly detailed and balanced top to bottom. There's really good driver integration. It's a very transparent speaker. The treble is going to be on the slightly forward side of neutral, but you can attenuate that. The bass is going to be strong, punchy, and it's going to have great tone to it. And plus, it's going to lay down this absolutely massive wall of sound. Now, who is it for and who is it not for? Well, obviously, if you like the sound of the Model 5, then you're probably going to love the sound of the Model 7. Next, I think it's great for those of you who like a speaker that's very flexible and easy to work with. Now when it comes to the Model 7, the interesting thing here is that you can actually get 3 different sonic profiles from this speaker just depending on how you have it positioned. For example, if you want a very accurate sound, you can achieve that with the Model 7. In fact, it may be one of the most neutral sounding vintage wide baffle speakers that I've heard to date, to the point to where I wouldn't be surprised if some people decide to use it in a recording studio. Next, it's also a great speaker for those of you who like this more rolled off sound, something that allows you to listen to music for hours on end without fatigue. And it's also, on the opposite end of that, great for those of you who say, hey, if I buy a big speaker like this, I want it to rock and roll. I want that forward in-your-face sound. I want that treble and that punchy bass. If that's what you're looking for, then yeah, you can get that out of the same speaker. And it basically just all depends on how you have it set up. Now, I'll go into those details later on in this video, but now it's time to move on to who wouldn't like this speaker very much. Now, if you never liked the sound of the Model 5, then odds are you're not going to like the sound of the Model 7. Number 2, if you're not a fan of metal dome tweeters, odds are you're not going to be a fan of the Model 7. And then number 3, some of you are going to be intimidated by a speaker that can change so much depending on how you have it set up in your room. So if that's you, then you'd probably be better off with more of a drop and plop solution from the likes of Wharfedale. Anyways, that is going to be my short conclusion. So now it's time to dive into more details to make sure this is the right speaker for you. So let's go ahead and kick things off by going over the many great things about the Model 7's performance. Now, as I just said, I think one of the most interesting thing about the Model 7 is the fact that you can achieve 3 different sound characteristics from the speaker based purely off of how you have it set up in your room. And the cool thing is, it's actually not difficult to unlock those 3 different traits. And I'm going to explain how to do that at the very end of this video, but first, let me go ahead and try to set some realistic expectations for you in case you buy these speakers and you set them up in your room. Because if you do that, I think the first thing that most of you are going to notice is that it has a very balanced and clean sound to it, meaning that there's great integration between the tweeter, the mid-range driver, and the woofer, and the overall presentation is going to be highly detailed. When it comes to voicing, I think most of you are going to notice that out of the box, it has a sound that I would describe as being on the forward side of neutral, meaning that there's going to be a little bit of a bump into treble, the mid-range is very clean and linear, and the bass is also going to be mostly clean and linear with perhaps a little bit of warmth in the upper bass. And what that means is you're getting a speaker that gives you a lot of the audiophile traits, but with just enough coloration to be interesting. And beyond that, you would think that based off the looks, it's just a big, dumb vintage box. And don't get me wrong, it does some of the big, dumb, fun vintage things very well. It can play at loud volumes. It will give you this strong, clean bass output, and it'll give the music that you listen to this really big and fun sense of scale. And yet, when you listen critically, you'll notice that the mid-range is very transparent and clean, and it has really good tone to it. The bass also has really good tone to it. It too can be very fast, yet at the same time punchy. And then when it comes to imaging, the design of this speaker allows it to project sound out into the room while minimizing the interaction with your sidewalls. And what this means is when you sit down in between the speakers and listen to them, you're going to get this wall of sound with very locked in focus in between the speakers. And it's going to be very consistent across a wide variety of rooms. So it has a lot of traits that I think many of you will enjoy. And outside of just sound quality, there's also going to be the fact that it comes with a 10-year warranty. It's a very well-made speaker. It's not too fussy with the type of electronics that it works with, and it's very versatile when it comes to how to get it to perform well in your living space. But still, it's not perfect, so let's go over some of those imperfections now. Okay, so even though there are many great things about the performance of the Model 7, it's definitely not all perfect, so let's go over some of those imperfections now. And to help me out, I have a list, that way I don't miss anything important. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. So number 1, I found that the Model 7 isn't the best solution for those of you who like to listen at whisper quiet volumes. I'm talking about under 65 dB. I found that at those volumes, the mid-range kind of takes a vacation somewhere. This is a speaker that needs just a little bit of volume in order to wake up. Next, I found that the treble on the Model 7, while it's not bad, it's only a modest upgrade over the sound of the Model 5. Now, I was hoping for something that would be a little bit more refined in this price class, but in the context of vintage style speakers, it's not too bad. I just wish, again, it was just a little bit more of an upgrade. And then number 3, this speaker isn't very easy to drive. In fact, it has an impedance of 4 ohms, and I know it dips below that at certain frequencies. I'll publish that information in the description box once I have it. But the bottom line is this. You don't need a powerful amplifier to drive the Model 7s, but you definitely need an amplifier that has a robust power supply. Next, the off-axis performance is just okay. Look, it's perfectly serviceable if you want to get up and clean the house and go and cook and all that stuff, but this really is a speaker that's meant for one listener who's going to sit in between the speakers. That's where the entire sound just really clicks and comes together. Now, moving on, let's go talk about some aesthetic things. So, the grills. I have a problem with the grills. The grills that I've had tend to bunch up and wrinkle. And when I approached KLH about this, they said, well, that seems unusual. We'll just spray it with water and that'll be okay. And I'm thinking to myself, well, these are $6,000 speakers. I didn't expect to have to water my grills like plants in order to get them to look new. So in my experience, this just means that there's not enough tension on the material, but that's a problem with these speakers that I've had. And then lastly, on another QC issue is going to be the metal stands come with rubber footers on the bottom, and 2 of those rubber footers have already come off, indicating that the glue may not be appropriate for the marriage between or adhesion between the rubber and the metal. So, as I said, it's not perfect. There are some problems with these speakers, some of which I think KLH can easily resolve. Anyways, with that said, it's time to give this review some more context by going over some comparisons. Okay, so I'm going to start off this review by addressing the elephant in the room just right up front. How does the Model 7 compare to the Model 5, and do I feel like the Model 7 is worth the additional money? Well, let me start off by saying this. In terms of performance, yeah, the Model 7 is hands down the better speaker. Not only can it play louder and give you a fuller range sound with a lot more bass, the treble, even though it's similar to the Model 5, is going to be a little more nuanced. The mid-range is going to play with a much bigger sense of scale. It's also going to be more transparent and more neutral. And the imaging is also going to be better. In particular, the Model 7 interacts less with your room boundaries, which allows you to get more consistent imaging when you're sitting in the sweet spot. Now, with that being said, there's still something to be said about the Model 5 because it has a brighter and more lively sound. And I'll say this, if you are somebody who uses the Model 5 in a small room and you love the sound of this speaker, there's no need to change. I wouldn't worry about upgrading it. However, if you have a set of Model 5s and you're wanting the next level in performance, the same sound but better, that's what the Model 7 is for, and I think it's definitely worth it, especially if you're in a larger room. Anyways, that is going to be my take on how these two speakers compare, so now it's time to go over more of an apples to apples comparison. Alright, so now let's have some fun and talk about how the Model 7 compares to one of the most popular vintage style speakers in its price range, the Klipsch Forte IV. Now the Forte IV retails for $5,500 a pair, which is $500 less than the Model 7. So let's kick things off by going over the differences in terms of build quality, fit, and finish. Now when it comes to build quality, both of these speakers are well-made, heavy products. If I had to give the advantage to one, it would be to KLH, simply because without its stand, it's technically the smaller speaker, and despite that, it weighs almost the same as the Klipsch, and when you lift it, it's clear that it's the more dense and inert cabinet. However, when it comes to the differences in terms of fit and finish, that's where things are going to get entirely subjective. For example, subjectively speaking, I prefer the wood veneers on KLH simply because I find them more interesting to look at, I feel like it's well applied, and that it should hold up better over time. And I say that because I haven't had the best of luck with Klipsch Heritage veneers, whether it's the black, the walnut, or the cherry. It feels like if you just look at it the wrong way, it's going to develop a scratch. It's very prone to damage. Having said that, I could see some of you preferring the look of the Klipsch simply because it has more of that traditional wood refined aesthetic. It's also worth mentioning that I feel like the grills on the Klipsch is a little bit more rugged when compared to the KLH, and it's also worth mentioning that some of you are going to care about the fact that the Klipsch is designed and assembled in the United States, whereas the KLH is going to be designed in the United States but made in China. So that is going to be it in terms of how they compare in terms of build, fit, and finish. So now let's talk about how they compare to one another in terms of sound quality. Alright, so as you guys can tell, I put the grills on both speakers, that way you all can see what they look like with the grills on. So now let's go ahead and talk about performance. And I think it's best to start off with the three things that they actually have in common. Number one, both the Klipsch and the KLH have a sound that I would describe as being on the forward side of neutral, which basically means the treble's a little bit spicy. Number two, both speakers project music with the same big sense of scale, with perhaps the slight advantage going to KLH due to its height advantage. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, both speakers excel with playing back all types of music. The Forte 4 seems to be a little bit better when it comes to reproducing the sound of live music, whereas the KLH seems to be a little bit better when it comes to reproducing the sound of modern music. However, both speakers are musicphile speakers and they're down to play anything. But still, they have a different sound, so let's go over those differences now. That way you can decide which one may be best for you. And we're going to start off with the advantages of the Klipsch Forte 4. So, as most of you know, the Forte 4 is a highly sensitive horn speaker, and that's going to give you a number of different advantages. The first is that you don't need a lot of power to take the Klipsch to very loud volumes. So if you're a fan of low-power tube amps or even Class A or Class AB amplifiers, there's a chance you'll prefer the Forte 4 with those type of electronics. Next, if you're somebody who likes to listen at very low volumes, I'm talking about under 65 dB, you're probably going to prefer the Forte 4 simply because it will sound fuller and more lively at those volumes, whereas the KLH needs just a little bit of volume to get up and going. And then lastly, the Klipsch has that unique horn sound that does a great job of making it seem like the performers are just right there in your room playing music. It's a very unique presentation that, even though the KLH can actually come surprisingly close to replicating that, it doesn't do it quite to the same degree as the Forte 4. But this kind of leads into some of the problems with the Forte 4. It uses a horn. Some people are very sensitive to the sound of horns, and it's something you're either going to love or hate. You just have to experience it for yourself to make that determination. And then lastly, when it comes to bass performance, the bass can be really good on the Forte 4, but it really depends on the room that you're in. For example, if you are in a big room, the bass can sound kind of light and thin. However, if you put the speaker in a small room or even in a medium-sized room, the opposite becomes true, and that's when you can get this warm, punchy, and full bass output out of the speaker. Now, who is it for ultimately? I think it's for somebody who likes that lively sound, who wants it to feel like that you're in the middle, like front row at a concert, and if you like that experience and you don't mind the sound of a horn, there's a good chance you're going to prefer the Forte 4. Now, let's go ahead and go over the advantages of the KLH Model 7. So the KLH Model 7's biggest advantage is that it is a heck of a lot more of a flexible speaker than with what you get with the Forte 4. And what I mean by that is, when you get the Klipsch Forte, there's only so much you can do to really change its sonic character. Whereas with the Model 7, you can get 3 distinctly different sonic profiles out of it for free. All you have to do is just mess around with the notch in the back, positioning, and the grills, because if you want a neutral sound, you're going to get perhaps the most neutral sound that's offered in a vintage style loudspeaker. Or if you want a soft and rolled off sound, something that you can listen to for hours on end, you can get that with the Model 7. And also, if you want that lively, forward, rock and roll sound that's similar to what you get with Klipsch, you can get that too. So you have a lot more flexibility in customizing the sound to your taste. Now, naturally, the speaker is going to be more balanced than what you get with the Klipsch. It's going to be more accurate. The bass quality is going to be better. It's going to extend lower, and it's going to be more consistent across a wider variety of rooms. And when it comes to imaging, because the KLH interacts with your room boundaries less, that means you're going to get more consistent imaging in the sweet spot, and you're going to get that locked-in center soundstage pretty much no matter what you do. So overall, I think the KLH is the more well-rounded speaker, and I think it's better for somebody who likes the idea of having the ability to customize the sound to your taste, and it's something that's probably easier to get into versus the Klipsch, where you really have to know if you love the sound of horns or not. Both speakers are a blast to listen to. There's really no right or wrong here. It's just choosing what's best for you. And with that said, let's go ahead and wrap up this review. So at the beginning of this review, I asked a rather dramatic question, which is, has KLH done it again? Have they set a new performance standard with vintage style loudspeakers? And the truth is, I don't know. And the reason why I don't know is because a lot has changed in the hi-fi market since they re-released the Model 5 in the early 2020s. Right now, the market is saturated with retro style speakers, and I haven't heard them all. But what I can say is that in my experience, the Model 7 is the type of speaker that can make a lot of people happy because on one hand, you get most of the traits that audiophiles love. You get this clarity and balance, but you also get that fun musical factor. You get this huge sense of scale, big, strong bass, and plus you have the ability to tune the speaker to your liking based strictly off of how you have it positioned. I think a lot of people will like that. And plus, one of the things I didn't even talk about is that it has great tone. The sound of electric guitars or the sound of violins or a piano or even the human voice sound really great through the Model 7s. So when you add all of that together, plus a 10-year warranty, yeah, this is a pretty easy speaker to recommend. Personally speaking, I had a blast listening to the Model 7s in the months that I've had them. Anyways, that is going to be my take on these speakers. Stick around if you're interested in equipment matching or positioning tips, but if you've reached the end of the line, well, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace. Okay, so first let's go over positioning tips and how to unlock those different character traits that I've spoken about so much in this video. Now first, I need to make it clear that you'll want to read the manual. This is one of those rare times where I feel like a speaker manufacturer actually did a good job in writing the manual, and this will give you a lot of illustrations and advice on how to set up the speakers. But if you're too lazy for that, this is what I have to say. First and foremost, these speakers are very easy to work with, and it's an acoustic suspension design, which means yes, you can place these close to a wall boundary and still get relatively clean bass. But if you want the best bass performance out of these speakers, then as with everything else, you need to give it some room to breathe. I would say a minimum of 6 inches and more ideally about a foot away from any wall boundary. Now, when it comes to unlocking those different characters, I'm going to make this very, very easy for you guys. If you want a neutral sound, leave the grills on the speaker, put the attenuation switch to medium, and then toe them towards your position only just a little bit, very minimal towing. If you want that rolled off and smooth and easy to listen to sound, leave the grills on. Now you're going to have the speakers facing more or less directly out into the room with almost no toe-in whatsoever, and then experiment between the medium and low setting on the attenuation switch. And then lastly, if you want more of that forward and lively sound, what you're going to want to do is point the speakers more or less towards your listening position, take the grills off, and either leave the attenuation switch on medium or on high, and that's going to give you that very punchy and lively sound. And of course, there's a whole bunch of different configurations that you can experiment with. This is in general what I found that does a great job of giving you those 3 different sonic characters that I talked to you guys about. Now, let's go ahead and move on and talk about equipment matching. So lastly, let's talk about the type of equipment that can really make the Model 7 sing. Now, as I mentioned throughout this video, the KLH Model 5s are relatively amplifier agnostic, meaning that you don't need to fret over the exact type of amplifier that's going to sound good with them. It doesn't really matter if it's Class D, Class AB, Class A, tubes. Odds are they're going to sound good, whether they're warm sounding, neutral, thin sounding. It doesn't really matter because you have so much flexibility when it comes to positioning these speakers. You can adjust the sound of the speakers mostly by changing the positioning. Still, there are going to be some guidelines to follow, so let's start off with power requirements. These speakers like their power, and you don't need a ton of it, but you do need high quality power. Now, in my opinion, I would say most people are going to want a minimum of 20 to 25 watts per channel with these speakers. You can get away with that if you're in a smaller room, but if you're in a larger room, especially if you listen at louder volumes, you'll probably want to be more at 100 watts per channel, or even more if you listen at crazy loud volumes. Now, let's talk about specific amplifier pairings that I found to be pretty good at different price points. On the most affordable end, I would say just over $1,000, I found the Atoll IN-50 to sound really good with the Model 7s. I mean, no, it's not going to take full advantage of the resolution, but it still results in a very fun foot tapping sound for not a lot of money. Next, if you spend a little bit more money and if you're in a small room, the Naim 50th anniversary Nait sounds fantastic with these speakers, and even though that little integrated is only rated at 25 watts per channel, those are very powerful 25 watts. Moving up the line, If you know you need a lot of features, but you still want that retro style aesthetic, then I found advanced Paris integrated amps, specifically the A12, to sound very good with the Model 7s. And then lastly, of course, if you have more money to spend, yes, these speakers do scale. So if you want to spend up to, say, $10,000 on an integrated amp from Accuphase or Luxman, go ahead and do it. It's a great match. And personally, I've found that they can scale all the way up to around $20,000 in integrated amps. So yes, that means you can definitely tell a difference between my Accuphase E280 and the Accuphase E800 3D speakers. With that said though, I think the sweet spot is going to be anywhere between $3,000 to $6,000 on an integrated or power amp preamp combo for these speakers. I think spending any more money than that will definitely net you positive results, but you may hit the point of diminishing returns. Anyways, that is going to be my take on equipment matching. We've finally reached the end, so once again, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.